So I want to start with a little exercise this morning. I invite us to close our eyes for a moment and just think about who you are now, in this moment in time. What is it that you know? Now I want us to think about who we were 10 years ago. Is there any wisdom or words of advice that you would give that person? Now, I think most of us are old enough to think about the person we were when we were 30 years old. Would the 30-year-old you recognize who you are now? What words of wisdom might you give your 30-year-old self? And likewise, what words of wisdom might your 30-year-old self give to you now? If you could write a letter to the person you were at any stage of your life, which you would you write the letter to? Which person would need to hear it the most, and what might you tell that aspect of you? Imagine yourself in a room with each of the people you were with each decade in life. The 10-year-old, the 20-year-old, the 30-year-old, 40, 50, 60. Do you think those 6 or 7 or 8 people would like each other? Would they even recognize each other? Why or why not? As we enter into this reflection on wisdom, I invite us to keep these images with us, with compassion and love, understanding that we're always moving, we're always changing. Sometimes we may have times in our life when we feel wise, and other times we feel not so wise, and doesn't necessarily mean, am I right now wiser than the person I was at age 40? Or have I possibly forgotten some things that would be good to remember? We did this exercise a few years ago when Ernie Steck reached out to me and said, you know, we have a wonderful bridging ceremony for when our youth graduate and transition into adulthood. Maybe it would be nice to have some type of ceremony for the elders in the congregation. And so that was a lovely sentiment, and I started thinking about something about what that might look like, and I asked some people what they thought about doing something like that. And the question I kept getting in return was, well, what does that look like? Who is an elder? Is it determined by age only? Because I don't feel like an elder, even though my age determines that I am. What are we transitioning to, and when? And is 60 old? Or is 70 old? Or is 80 old? And so I realized that it's not as simple as just creating a one-size-fits-all ritual. Our bridging ceremonies that we do in the spring are specific. They are for graduating seniors who are 17 or 18 years old. But this task that Ernie asked me to engage in was a little more elusive. Because what is wisdom? What is elder? What is aging? And I've shared this story before, but I'm going to share it again because I love it. We had somebody who I would consider a wise elder in our congregation about 10 years ago. His name was Bill Timer. And he told me when we were actually moving, so it must have been like 11 years ago now, or we were moving from where we were renting our space at the Congregational Church into this building, and he was there to help with boxes, and he looked at me in complete seriousness, and he said, Wendy, I have to tell you, this 92-year-old body just doesn't move the way it did at 88. And he was totally serious. And so I thought, what if we had a service that revolved around wisdom and not necessarily age? And so we did that a few years ago, because what I realized is that wisdom, like I said in the reading this morning, wisdom, true wisdom, is eternal. And it transcends place, age, or time. And wisdom can be gleaned and shared by all of us, no matter what chronological age we find ourselves experiencing at any period in time. And so we put together a service inspired by Ernie called Wisdom Through the Ages. And it was fun. And now a few years later, here we are as I'm talking about wisdom in relation to what it means to be a leader in the year 2024. And I was enjoying rereading that sermon I wrote a few years ago with the quotes from different people. And I'm going to share just a few of these. I'm going to remind us of our centering words, though, first. Truth is, it can neither be lost, nor sought, nor found. It is there, wherever you are, being within you. Yet it can be recognized or unrecognized, real or false to you. If you hide it, it becomes unreal to you because you hid it and surrounded it with fear. And throughout the years, I've been so interested in that question that Maya asked the kids this morning. What is the difference between wisdom and knowledge? And the definition that I came up with is wisdom is something on the deepest level. Wisdom is knowing something on the deepest level and then using our power of discernment to know what to do with it. Wisdom is the ability to bridge the gap between the intellect and our true inner knowing. That's how I understand wisdom. I also like what Ann Wilson Schaaf says. She says, wisdom is knowledge that has been tested with time and has the pattern of the ages upon it. I'm going to say that again. Wisdom is knowledge that has been tested with time and has the pattern of ages upon it. Barbara Martin says, until a thought becomes a living truth, it is not wisdom. I'm going to say that again and let us think about that. Until a thought becomes a living truth, it is not wisdom. And the way that I would understand that is, for example, if we say we need to be more patient, I can say I need to be more patient. That takes 2 seconds. But it may take me a lifetime to truly become a patient person. That's one way I understand that difference between the knowledge and the wisdom. The wisdom incorporates the embodiment of what we're thinking about. So one of my good friends named Scott Hogue, who I have shared these stories many times too if you've been here over the ages, but every time I come across them, I want to share them again because they just touch my heart. He is a chaplain at Hope West, and occasionally on Facebook he will just show a little, write a little snippet of some of the thoughts or experiences he has as a hospice chaplain. And a few years ago he shared these 2 reflections. He writes, 92 years old, in hospice, he had one goal before he died. Having served as a paratrooper over Europe during World War II, he wanted to parachute one more time. Hospice thought, why not? His hospice team contacted a local tandem parachute company and they agreed to the jump. The hospice CNA transported him in the wheelchair to the van in Moab, Utah. This honored veteran who needed assistance to stand made a successful tandem jump. Somewhere between heaven and earth, he was a young man again. Isn't that beautiful? It's eternal. Somewhere between heaven and earth, we're young again. He also wrote this, a lesson I learned which has influenced me ever since. I visited a man who was 92 years old, blind and hard of hearing. When he was young, he had served as a chaplain in the trenches of World War I. Before I left, he asked me to pray for him. I have much to do in my service to the Lord, he said. I looked at this frail man sitting in a wheelchair and asked, what do you still have to do? He was silent and then replied, the scripture says your old men will dream dreams. Pausing, he smiled and continued, I have dreams to dream. And Scott writes, now 25 years later, as a chaplain, I too hold out hope that meaning and purpose is present in any setting or circumstance. To me, that's wisdom. A deeper inner knowing that is transcending space and time and circumstance. One of my favorite movies is Forrest Gump, and it's getting older now, so not everybody, not the younger generations don't know Forrest Gump, but I think most of us in this room probably know Forrest Gump. And in that movie, Tom Hanks' character Forrest, he was I think he was grieving, and he just put on his shoes and he started running. And he kept running. And he kept running. And he ran from one side of the country to the other side of the country. And then when he hit the other side of the country, he turned around and ran back. And he ran in the movie for a total of about 3 years back and forth across the country. But what happened was, as he kept running, people took notice. And then some people started running with him. And before long, he was on the news and had this huge following. And then one day, he just stopped and turned around, and everybody was waiting for him to say something very profound because they had been running with him and following him for years. And I think he said something to the effect of, I'm going home now. and he turned and he walked away. But my question is, what were the people expecting to hear? They were expecting to hear words of wisdom. They had decided that this man who said nothing, who they knew nothing about, who was just running back and forth the country, thousands of people had decided that he had it figured out. And they projected that need onto him, and they deemed him wise. What was it that was deemed wise about running back and forth across the country? Was it that he didn't talk? Was it that he didn't say a word in 3 years? Was it because he wasn't making a noise the rest of us make with our mouths? Maybe it was because it appeared that he had a purpose. He seemed to know where he was going. Is that why it became easy for other people to follow, because they were following somebody who they thought knew where he was going and had it figured out? And in our own lives, why were the people who decided to run with him? Why were they so willing to drop everything in their own lives to follow somebody who appeared to know? I wonder, is it because perhaps they thought that Forrest had found his own true inner north, his own sense of direction and wisdom and peace, and there were so many people that wanted to have that same experience? Robert Anton Wilson says, "How many times have you encountered the saying, 'When the student is ready, the master speaks'? Do you know why that is true? The door opens inward. The master is everywhere, but the student has to open his mind to hear the master's voice." We're all here. We're all on our own journey. If, as the Course in Miracles says, truth is, and it can neither be found nor lost, it just is. Maybe it's for us to ask ourselves the question, are we opening that door to allow the truth to enter inside us? And perhaps we realize that somebody else can open that door for us because we're the keepers of our own heart. And so, was Forrest Gump wise? In his own way, he was, because he was grieving. He listened to what his spirit, his soul, his body needed, and it needed to run. And he was being authentic within himself. And he didn't stop to question it or think about it. He just did what he needed to do. But what he needed to do isn't necessarily what other people needed to do. And so that's where I think spiritual discernment and wisdom come in, that we are all in that conversation with our own higher self, our own heart, our own experiences. So wisdom can be simple. It can be easy. We don't have to think into it. I think I've shared this story before too. When I was younger, I loved going to the bookstores. Like, I would spend my life at Barnes and Noble. And if I would get stressed out, I would find myself heading to the bookstore to go find the right book that was going to give me that jump start or that wisdom. And it was like my favorite thing to do on a Saturday night was hang out at a bookstore with cafe and cocoa is what they called it at the time, and books. And I was doing that, and one day I was driving to the bookstore in that same kind of process, and all of a sudden this little voice popped into my head, and it said, "Wendy, what is one more book going to do for you? What are you looking for? What you are looking for is not in another book. You have already read all the books you need. Now you need to start living it." And I turned around, and I didn't actually go back into a bookstore or read a book for about like 10 more years. I just kind of incorporated it. And then, a few years ago, the floodgates open, and I'm back to just, reading and wanting to, now it's audiobooks because I don't have time to read. But that was just so interesting because at that time it was like, like you've read everything you need. It's all in here somewhere, but you're not going to move to the next step in your spiritual growth until you actually let it settle into your body and your lived experience. Otherwise, it just stays up here in the intellect, and it goes back to the I know I need to be more patient, but am I actually becoming a patient person? And so it probably eventually, I'm not there yet. I'm still audiobook after audiobook right now. But eventually, probably that process will come back again, and I'll be like, nope, time to assimilate and acclimate everything that has opened up for me in the last 5 years. And then we keep going. So don't be afraid to let yourself move from the head to the heart. It's okay. It's part of what it means to be on a spiritual journey. It's part of what it means to be on that spiritual path. And we are not going to get to wisdom if we stay in our head. And so I want to close today with one of the best monologues I've heard, one of my favorites of all time, another movie that most of us have probably seen. And I've shared this before, actually in my newsletter and in some sermons, but it is Robin Williams' character in Good Will Hunting. And he is a psychologist or psychiatrist who is working with this young man named Will, who is a genius. But Will is just so angry at the world, and Robin Williams is trying to connect with him. And this genius has alienated every other person that has ever tried to help him because he's so smart, and he can hone in on how to just make people mad enough that they say, "Get out of my life." And Robin Williams is saying, "I'm not going to do that." But this is a great little monologue that I want us to listen to again. So, if I asked you about art, you'd probably give me the skinny on every art book ever written. Michelangelo, you know a lot about him. Life's work, political aspirations, him and the Pope, sexual orientation, the whole works, right? But I bet you can't tell me what it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. You've never actually stood there and looked up at that beautiful ceiling. You're a tough kid. I ask you about war, and you'd probably throw Shakespeare at me, right? Once more into the breach, dear friends. But you've never been near one. You've never held your best friend's head in your lap and watched him gasp his last breath, looking to you for help. And if I asked you about love, you could probably quote me a sonnet. But you've never looked at a woman and been totally vulnerable, known someone could level you with her eyes, feeling like God put an angel on earth just for you, who could rescue you from the depths of hell. And you wouldn't know what it's like to be her angel, and to have that love for her, to be there forever, through anything, through cancer. You wouldn't know about sitting up in a hospital room for 2 months, holding her hand, because the doctors could see in your eyes that the term visiting hours don't apply to you. You don't know about real loss, because that only occurs when you love something more than you love yourself. I doubt you've ever dared to love anybody that much. I look at you. I don't see an intelligent, confident man. I see a cocky, scared kid. But you're a genius, Will. No one denies that. No one could possibly understand the depth of you. But you presume to know everything about me because you saw a painting of mine and you ripped my life apart. You're an orphan, right? Do you think I'd know the first thing about how hard your life has been, how you feel, who you are, because I read Oliver Twist? Does that encapsulate you? Personally, I don't care about all of that, because you know what? I can't learn anything from you I can't read in some book. Unless you want to talk about you, who you are. And I'm fascinated. I'm in. But you don't want to do that, do you, sport? You're terrified of what you might say. Your move, Chief. When we talk about the difference between wisdom and intelligence, that scene is what sums it up. You can have so much in your intellect, but if you haven't brought it into your body, into your heart, into your emotions, into your soul, and into your lived expression of life, then it's just an academic exercise. And so my invitation for us this week is to take some of these scenes with you into your week. Where are you wise? What do you know? And where are the areas in your life that your knowing and your lived experience have come together? Let's close out today with some music. Number 346 in your gray hymnal, Come Sing a Song with Me.